Okay, I'm delighted to be joined by former Peterborough United midfielder and occasional right back Mathew Gill. I have to give props to you back in because you've really centred this Zoom camera in the perfect position. We've had all sorts in this time, but you look as if you've got this thing mastered.
I've tried my best, Phil. Thanks for having me on. I've tried my best. This is one of about 100 I've done during this period with staff meetings and stuff. So I'll try and rotate it around the house if I can.
Excellent. You've got enough bedrooms, I'm sure. In terms of your time at Peterborough United as a player, obviously, I think you made your debut away at Torquay, which is, as local games go, you can't get much further away than that. What can you remember about how you ended up making your debut? Because Baz was giving quite a few youngsters his chance at that point.
He did. I remember it very fondly. I think maybe on the Wednesday or Thursday, I got the nod that I'd be going with the squad. I don't know if I knew I was starting at that point. Rang mum and dad, as you do, and dad asked where the game was. I said away to Torquay, but they made it in the end. They came, and I think in that team, Mushy would have played, Digger played, Franny Green played up front, I think. So there's a few young lads playing in that game, which is great. Obviously, we'd had a successful youth cup that year. I think that's what gave Baz the sort of bravery to play us, or a little bit of reward for us, I suppose. We ended up losing the game 3-1, but remember it being really hot, loving the day. Andy Edwards and Steve Castle playing in the game, who I'm still in contact with now. I was actually doing Stevie's boots at that point still. So it was nice to make my debut next to him, and I probably grabbed his boots after the game to clean. So yeah, real fun memories about the debut. It was great to get that opportunity to play at a young age as well, I suppose.
Yeah, it's always interesting, isn't it, when players make their debuts? Because ultimately, yes, it's all on yourself, a lot of it. But if you've got someone alongside you that can help you, like Steve Castle you mentioned there, it can really make you grow. Because there's so many examples of people that make their debut and just disappear. But it's about performance and also understanding the game, and having those kind of people around you must have been key.
Unbelievably key. I don't want a hot drink. I'm fine, thanks. I'm being recorded. Sorry. She asked me if I want a brew. That's the first time she's ever asked me if I want a tea or coffee.
Well, it's amazing when the cameras start rolling, isn't it?
Oh, I think us boys coming through that spell were unbelievably lucky to have senior players within the group. I know that at that point, Baz always had senior players in and around his squads, and that mix of young players. And we were lucky. We mentioned Eagle, Stevie, Derek Payne at that point, Dean Hooper. We had so many players that we could go to if we needed to, but really just looking at them as role models and looking after us. Stevie used to look after me on a pitch without a shadow of a doubt, and I felt that he did that for me. So I would have done anything for him at that point, and I think that's really important. If it's a little bit tougher now, especially with there's no reserve team football as such. I think that coming through at that stage really helped me as a young player.
Yeah, obviously when you come through the academy system as well, everything is geared towards making your professional debut. Did you feel that you were ready? I mean, you were ready physically, but did you feel you were ready in terms of being in tune to what to expect?
Probably not, and I think that's why Baz gives young players an opportunity, or did give young players an opportunity, because they got nothing to compare it to. It's just go on. It's naivety almost. Just go and enjoy yourself, play how you do. I like how you mentioned that I was ready physically. I think I was 9 stone.
You were never ready physically, but what I mean is, I mean, you were ready for that side of the game in terms of, you were never going to shirk a tackle.
No, I get what you mean. Please don't worry. I think that the unknown, I think, is quite good if you don't think about it too much. You just go for it. And I think as young lads, we had I've reflected on it since now working in football, that Baz was unbelievably brave to chuck us in. Really brave, and we need to thank him for that, really, because now I see young lads not getting opportunities because it's such a volatile industry for head coaches and managers. At that point, Baz just chucked us in. I think, well, Mushy obviously played when he was 15, didn't he? And Baz had no problem in go on then, just go and play. And that is one of the key strengths I've sort of reflected on from Baz during that spell.
Mm. Your debut actually had a yellow card, which I guess doesn't really surprise me too much in the sense that when you're a young player and you're making your debut, you're going to be, on a bit of adrenaline. I'd imagine that it was probably for a late tackle.
It was a little bit late, and I think at the time I then gave another free kick away pretty quickly after, and I think it was close to our box. I was in the wall following that free kick, and I can't remember who it was. It might have been Eagle, but someone said to me, "You need to calm down. Probably one more foul and could go within the first 45 minutes of your debut." So again, having them experienced boys around you, but I think you build your debut up. You're desperate for it. You want to make an impact, and also I think that Baz was quite clever in me making me debut away from home. I think that obviously we had quite a good travelling support at that point, but obviously not as many as at London Road. And I think that it maybe takes the pressure off slightly, as if it had been a home debut. That came the following week. But I think it's quite clever from Baz, and obviously you don't want to get sent off on your debut. So I did calm down slightly after that.
You mentioned obviously the successful Youth Cup team and the fact that a lot of you sort of came through together. And I often wonder when players are making that progression that you can do a lot on ability, but was it a case of helping each other go through the process? Because as you say, you found out on the Tuesday or Wednesday of that week, so I'd imagine the Thursday and the Friday you were like a kid at Christmas and just chomping at the bit. And I guess talking to like-minded people that are going through the same thing must have been a help.
I think it helps no end. I think that you obviously seen the Man United scenario of it, them pushing each other, them wanting to challenge each other to be the one that made their debut. We had that, obviously all competitive lads, all desperate to get in the first team. I think that sort of competition really helps, and I think that's something that you try and create now within a team environment. Whether it's training, matching people up that are going to push each other, whatever it might be. I think that we certainly had that, and the camaraderie between the lot of us was unbelievable. Such a brilliant atmosphere, obviously built from Paul in the youth team, and I just think that helped us no end coming through together.
Speaking to Simon Ray, he said, and I don't know whether I believe him here, but he said that when he was playing like first team football, he also wanted to be involved in the reserves because he wanted to keep impressing, because obviously there were 6 centre halves at the time and Barry would always go out and buy someone else if you weren't performing. Were you someone that that loved football so much that you would have been prepared to do that had he put you in?
I think for Si, obviously he'd been at Birmingham under Baz, and I don't want to speak for him, but I think I remember him saying that at one point you couldn't get a peg in the dressing room that Baz had signed that many players. So I think that sort of competition was always there for Si. Obviously, at that point you're playing football, you're loving it. You're not doing it for the money. You're just loving what you're doing. I do remember once playing in a reserve game and getting a late call. I was there. If you was an apprentice, you would just go to the games. I would sit in the opposite stand, the Freeman stand at that point. Collect balls, whatever it might be, and I got a late shout. Someone called off, and I remember thinking, "Sugar, I had a McDonald's for tea that night." And I did get on the pitch. I think I played about 20 minutes, but I thought I can't let that happen again. But I loved the reserve team football at that point. Well, people like Payne, Howard Forrington, obviously. 80, I actually played in a couple of reserve team games with 80 when he was trying to come back from his leg break. So them sort of memories are what built the relationships I have with them people now. In constant contact with 80, obviously. And I think just them reserve team games were very different to what it is now. And as a young lad, you took so much from it. Being in a dressing room with senior players was worth its weight in gold at that point.
You obviously came through as a centre midfielder. You played a bit of time at right back as well. I guess most footballers want to say they're a midfielder or a defender or one of the other. Do you just have to accept that as your career goes on, that if you can potentially play in a different position, it can be a help rather than a hindrance?
Yeah, I think that's probably down to Wayne Turner. I think I came back from my cruciate when I was 19, and I think Wayne had come in at that point. And felt that I could play right back, and I ended up playing, I think, the whole League One season at right back at one point, and even a few games at left back. If I'm honest, I didn't really mind. I didn't really mind where I played. Always saw myself as a sort of a holding midfield player, a screener, a defender. It wouldn't be till later, and when I moved to Exeter, that somehow turned into a goal scoring one for one season. I suppose it's what the structure or framework you play within, what the head coach is like, and how he sees you or your attributes. Some coaches see only your strengths. Some coaches see what you can't do, so we'll put you in a position because of it. So I suppose Baz liked his midfielders getting in the box and scoring goals. That wasn't particularly a massive strength. So naturally probably thought my distribution was okay. Defensive of mine and Nelson. So I thought I'd have a go at right back. So I really enjoyed it there. And obviously playing with Eagle again, always next to Eagle, which was great. And so obviously Cyril was in that back four, and on quite a few occasions Jelly would have been left back. So playing with three of your mates is obviously good also.
You mentioned the cruciate knee injury, and obviously coming back from that, and I always wonder, having spoken to so many players down the years and so many different injuries that they've had, how they get through that. Because looking from afar, it seems so down and hard to be around an environment when all you want to do is participate. Everyone talks about lonely moments and things like that, but teammates and family really do get you through those moments, don't they?
They do. Obviously, I lived with Jelly at that point, and we'd both had pretty bad knee injuries. I think Jelly's had come first. He snapped his patella tendon when we were training up at Bretton. And we lived together. Obviously, then had my cruciate. And you get each other through. I think I was quite lucky that my family was only in Norwich, in Norfolk, so not too far away. But they're horrendous moments. I think you look back on them and I think, geez, I built it up in my head at that point. It wasn't so bad. It was 11 months in the end that you're just desperate to go and play. I think what I was lucky at that point is I had a really good relationship with Paul Schowler. Showers was unbelievable for me, and that cruciate injury has given me no problem since. I think that he had a real good knack of making sure you did your rehab properly. So the physical side, but he was also very good at the mental side and making sure that you had a laugh, you enjoyed your rehab. Really, really jovial guy, Showers, obviously you know him. And I owe a lot to him that you come through out the other end pretty positive, and luckily I didn't have another problem with that cruciate. A few more knee ops, but nothing to do with a cruciate.
That's probably because Showers was always on the golf course. That's probably how you got involved in golf, wasn't it? You mentioned Gareth Jellyman there. Obviously, everyone, whenever you say Matthew Gill, Gareth Jellyman tends to come quite soon after that. I mean, you're obviously good friends, and when you come through a youth system together and obviously go into the first team together, it does feel like a little bit of a journey, doesn't it? I don't want to describe you as Ant and Dec, but you're never really too far apart during your time at Posh.
No, we weren't, and probably obviously we were best men for each other a long time later, and we obviously lived together in a couple of addresses. And my wife, well, my future wife at that point, left university at Sheffield and said, "I'm going to move in," and I said, "Well, I need to speak to Jelly first." So that was my main priority, and so. Really, she moved in with me and Jelly rather than Jelly was living with us. So we tried to get slightly more mature, I would say, when she moved in. Left us some lists of jobs when we got home from training, and Jelly was unbelievable at doing them. He would do the hoovering, cleaning, whatever was done, just because he was a little bit scared of Bethan at the time. But yeah, unbelievably close with Gels. One of my best mates, and always will be.
I'm glad that Bethan didn't give you an ultimatum of Jelly or her, because I really dread to think what you'd have said.
Well, I wouldn't be married.
Oh, this is true. This is true. Before we sort of move on to other games, etc., etc., I seem to remember you had a half decent throw. Am I forgetting that, or it wasn't like Rory Delap-esque or Exeter Cohagen-esque, but it was something you worked on, wasn't it?
I did have a long throw. I didn't like admitting it really. But yeah, I did have a long throw. Baz made me use it a few times, and then when I remember later on in my career, I used it a bit for Exeter, and I went, where did that come from? And then I went on loan to Walsall, and I think we were drawing and we were struggling at the bottom of League One. And late on in the game, I was near the ball when it went out, got hold of it, threw it in the box. And Dean Smith was the head coach at the time and said, "You've played 4 games for us, and that's the first time we've known you've got a long throw." So he made me use it a bit more after that. But it's not something I worked on. I'd most definitely say that, please.
Obviously, it's 20 years since Wembley 2000, which makes me feel old, and I'd imagine makes you feel old as well. You obviously were you substitute used in both of the semi-finals, and obviously didn't get on at Wembley. I'd imagine it's just a silly thing to say you were gutted, because I'd imagine any player that was anywhere close to a squad would be gutted. When did Baz tell you, or did you expect it?
I think we entered Jersey in between the semi-final and the final. Went to Jersey on a little sort of trip, training camp. And I, like you do, you look around, think, crikey, we've got, I don't know, 24 fit players. Obviously got up on both in the semi-finals. So you try and work out in your head. I'm not sure when Baz named the squad. Obviously got on the bench, which was brilliant. I think it's something you reflect on at the time. You were disappointed not to get on, but you get carried away with it. Obviously the celebrations afterwards. And I remember Baz saying to me, "So I didn't put you on." And like, for him, like, Baz he divides opinion, but in that moment of sheer ecstasy, to take 5 seconds saying, "Sorry, I didn't get you on," I think sums him up from my point of view anyway. That the empathy he showed, even though it was one of the probably best moments we had at that time. It didn't stop me celebrating as if I'd scored the winner, so I carried on.
And you didn't score many of them. So I think Jelly got man of the match as well, didn't he, in that final? Which I'm sure he's talking about still now.
Yeah, Gell's obviously Ad's got the head cut, and Gels was brilliant. He had a fantastic season. Wayne really got the best, and Baz got the best out of Jelly and did great. I think we stayed down in London that night. We stayed either at Diggers or Mushies. I can't remember who it was. They came down to watch the game. A load of us went out in London. We got back for the bus parade the following morning. Most people were still in their suits from the previous night, because it was a Friday night game, wasn't it?
Yeah. And, I'd imagine most people were still a little bit inebriated as well.
Yeah, very much so, with my 9 stone 10 frame. It was one of the best. I think I stayed in the Great Northern that Saturday night, and it just seemed to be a 2 or 3 day bender, really, of celebrating.
But the thing is, when we speak to players when they finish their career, or even when they're further down their career, they all say the same thing, that they never really experience it all. They regret not taking it in. But I think sometimes players can go the other way and say, actually, do you know what? We did make the most of it. And that's the most important thing, because you will never have those moments again.
Yeah, I've certainly gone that way. I've fully embraced celebrating as much as I possibly could, and lucky enough to get other promotions throughout before I ended, and made sure I made the most of them, because they don't come around very often. And there's enough low points in a football career, player's football career, that I think if you get them high moments, that, like I said, the camaraderie between the group, it has to be good to have success, and it was brilliant. Lots of different personalities within that group, loads of different characters, and you want to celebrate, and that is what you remember when you finish, is those moments of celebrating. Probably not so much the game, just it's the memories of togetherness and enjoying the good moments.
As time progressed, obviously you got to play with a whole host of different individuals, different characters. We've done interviews with a number of them. You spoke to Neil Fenn just before the lockdown, and some really talented players, some real characters in the dressing room. I guess when you look back at that time, there were probably moments slipped away whereby we could have actually done a little bit better in terms of the results, because the ability on some of those players weren't in question, really.
Yeah, I think that Baz has always, and the club itself now still recruits excellently. Got a real knack of eyeing talent and recruiting talent, and it was no different back then. Baz has always had that ability, and we obviously had a lot of turnover of players. I would say that, and that's probably why my network's so big now, purely because of my spell at Peterborough. That players went on to have coaching careers or play for other clubs, and that extends your network very quickly. But I think that we had some obviously really, really good players, talented players, and enjoyed playing with all of them. Really did.
Speaking to several players when they're in the same dressing room as Jimmy Bullard, you either gravitate towards his banter or you try and stay out of his way. Where did you which camp did you fall in?
Me and Jimmy used to play a lot of golf together, so we was all right. I think I pretty much knew how to handle him, but I think he's been described probably a million times as a loose cannon, and I think that at any moment he could strike. So you needed to be prepared and perhaps not fall asleep on the team coach was the main thing. But Jim was just 100 miles an hour every minute of the day, so which can be infectious, and obviously that personality was massive within the group. And that was sort of around the time I'd done my cruise ship. So I remember did a bit of commentary at that point with Edwin, which I absolutely loved, and around the cup games against Newcastle and stuff. So it had been around that time. I think that Jimmy was just life and soul and provided a real energy in the dressing room.
It's funny because he played alongside Richard Forsyth. He was probably the yin to the yang, wasn't he?
Yeah, Fozzie was pretty dry. Yeah.
He was the first player that I ever interviewed, Richard Forsyth. When I joined the football club, I came in on a 3-week trial, and I always say that to people because it makes me sound like I was a player. But I remember Pep, who was my predecessor, bringing Richard Forsyth in and saying, interview him, and he was the first player I ever interviewed. And I'll always remember it because he was, as you say, incredibly dry, and you needed to work out quite quickly whether he's being serious or not.
Yeah, is it the West Country accent he had, didn't he? And Fozzie obviously was brilliant, and because they were so different, they worked quite well together. I think Fozzie really reliable, always pretty much stood in the middle of the pitch in centre midfield, and it allowed Jimmy to go wherever he wanted because he did. So I think they worked really well together.
I think you scored 5 goals during your Posh career.
Surprising.
Yeah, I was surprised as well. Probably deflections or own goals, but 5 is what the record says. My research tells me that you made 169 appearances in your certainly your first spell at the football club. Obviously, when you set out as a young boy, making your way in the game, you must be pleased that you managed to rack up as many injuries as many games as you did. Sorry, given the amount of injuries and serious injuries that did affect you.
I think I sort of knew how many I'd made. I knew it was around that sort of mark. I'd like to have made more for Peterborough, if I'm honest. I saw it as that was my hometown club at that point, having been there so long, coming through the academy. I think that I'd obviously love more goals. The injuries part and parcel. I think that I ended up having 5 right knee ops, and it's probably what finished me in the end. Although I got to 34, which I'm really proud of, and I think it's throughout a career you have to build resilience, and injuries are part of it. You have disappointments with losses and not being in a team. Injuries is just another part of that. If you're not resilient enough to come back from injuries, then you're not going to play for too long. So I think that that's part and parcel. And like I said before, you have your support network, Jelly, family, whoever it might have been, Charles, help you get through. And I've only got fond memories about my time at Peterborough. I really have.
When it came to an end the first time around, you obviously joined Notts County on a free. But can you remember how that all transpired in terms of how you ended up leaving the club? Was it a simple case of you felt that you needed a new challenge? Was it a case of they're forcing me out here? Or was it a combination of both?
No, Baz was unbelievable, absolutely unbelievable, and I think it sort of come to that point where, not that I'd come stale, I just felt I needed a change and you called it a different challenge, and it probably was at the time. I just felt being at the club for that amount of time, it was probably about right. And Baz was great. Baz was really supportive, totally understood. and I think that it was quite an amicable split in the end.
All the great players, Lee Tomlin, Craig McCall-Smith, Aaron McLean, George Boyd, they all come back, and you came back as well.
Oh, I hope we weren't going to mention that. That was probably the best loan move I could have had, if I'm honest. Norwich had been promoted into the Championship, and was it September time?
Mm-hmm.
I think pretty early on, I knew I'd only played a few appearances for Norwich the previous season, not a massive part of their promotion to the Championship, and knew I needed a loan. I think, looking at it, that was the best possible loan I could have got at that point. For not only football reasons, but the connection with the club. Felt a bit like I'm going from my hometown club, as in Norwich, to my second hometown club, where I had so many fond memories. And I went into it with probably not in the right physical state. I would probably say my fitness was nowhere near it. I think that's a culmination of not being a regular, not being totally switched on to how I should have been. So that's a big regret for me at that point, because I had a relationship with Gary before that. I still have now, obviously played with his son Lee. And I think that I was a bit disappointed that I let myself down a little bit during that period. Not performing how I'd have liked to have done. But ultimately, Peterborough got promoted that season. So
you're not having
I think I made 4 appearances for Norwich that year, and they got promoted to the Premier League. And I think I made 4 appearances for Peterborough, and they got promoted. So even though I had nothing to do with either.
Well, integral, I would say, integral. Just finally, obviously, you mentioned so many different players you played with during that first spell, and they've all gone into coaching, it seems. David Oldfield, Steve Castle, Andy Edwards. Obviously, the whole raft of players that you've played with that have gone down that route. Is that just because, as a percentage, you're going to find that? Or is Peterborough some kind of breeding ground for successful managers and coaches?
I don't know. It's a good question. I think that partly the amount of turnover there was. So obviously, the more players you have come through your club, the more chance you've got of some of them becoming coaches and managers. Obviously, really tight with Eagle and AD. See a lot of them throughout my courses I do at St George's and stuff, and been lucky enough to go and watch them both work. Seeing Tiles this year was brilliant. Going into coaching. I don't know. I think that whether Baz had an influence on that, I'm not sure, because I wouldn't say Baz was an unbelievable coach.
No, I don't think he would, to be fair.
But certainly he had a way of influencing players. And that is really what coaching is. You need to influence a player. So let's say tactically, Baz wasn't unbelievable, but a way of influencing players to do what you want them to do, Baz was very good. So I think that those players that have gone on to be coaches, like myself, you take from every experience you have, and obviously with Baz, you have hundreds of experiences. So that does help. So I would say that maybe plays a small part in it, and probably why so many have gone on to coach or manage.